Okay. What's
Hello.
the corner?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. What the corner solution means is that buying just one good will be better than combining the two goods. Okay. A corner, but you see that when the curve is when the indifference curve is convex, then it's always better you, I mean, you combine the two goods, buy bit of this and then bit of that. But for the concave, because of the corner solution, it means that it is better. The consumer will prefer buying only one good to buying both goods, different quantities of both goods, because the level of satisfaction that you get from consuming only one good will be higher. Now, if you look at this example here, per this diagram, okay, if the person chooses bundle B, it means that he's consuming only good X, and the satisfaction that he's getting here is higher than when he buys part of Y, part of X. That is bundle A, because point B is on a higher indifference scale. If the person chooses bundle C, it means that he's buying only good Y. And buying only good Y means that he is getting a higher level of satisfaction than when he buys bundle A, because bundle C is on a higher indifference curve as compared to bundle A. But between B and C, the person will go for C because C is also on a higher indifference curve as compared to B. So for this case, per this diagram here, if the person wants to maximize the level of satisfaction, then he has to buy only good Y, just buy Y, don't buy any unit of X at all. That is what the corner solution brings. I hope that that's better.
Yes. So I just wanted to know if all that should be in the solution, all that explanation.
Uh, I mean, you can summarize it, right? Just give a concise. And most of the time, this question, the preamble is give a precise and concise. They don't want you to write too much, so you just put it in a very nice form, just in some few words. Even at times, they restrict the number of sentences that you can use. Okay, so you don't need to write too much. Even the Bible says that there's sin in the multitude of words. Sin is not lacking. If you talk too much, you see, you tend to make mistakes. So just make sure that you are getting the summarized form of whatever I am saying. If you want to write later, you can watch the video and then be putting some things down. But don't worry, I will try and put something down and send it to you. I mean, in a
Okay,
concise
thank
way.
you.
Okay, in a concise way.
Okay.
Okay, right. So we move on to the next. Please, my brother's agenda 2 is still on. Okay, so you guys should still be giving him the necessary support that you can. Okay. All right. Thank you, Lizzie.
Question 8. In your own words, what difference exists between equivalence variation and compensating variation?
Okay, so you see that this question is saying in your own words. So in your own words, I mean, don't use anyone else's words, just your own, how you understand it. And if I remember, when we're talking about this, I think for some of the groups, we didn't even do this, but basically, equivalent variation measures the amount of money that a consumer is willing to take or forgo in order to avoid a price change. Okay, just for an example, if there's going to be an increase in price, it means that there's going to be a reduction in the consumer's welfare or utility, holding your income constant. When there's an increase in price, you see that you cannot buy much goods as you used to. So the level of satisfaction that you get is going to fall. Now, if you don't change price, if you don't increase price, but rather you reduce the consumer's income, that one too is going to cause a reduction in the person's welfare or the level of satisfaction that he gets. Okay, so what equivalent variation talks about is the consumer can say that, fine, you want to increase price, and I know that after you have increased price, my level of satisfaction is going to fall. Then don't increase the price, but rather reduce my income level, which will result in the same reduction in welfare. So you deducting from my income is equivalent to increasing price. That's why we call it equivalent variation. Okay, so the amount of money that the consumer is willing to forego just to avoid an increase in price. When you increase price, the effect is the same as when you reduce the person's what? Income. Just assuming there's going to be a fall in price, that one will cause an increase in the consumer's welfare, because now the consumer can buy more quantities of the goods that he used to buy because of the fall in price. Now, if you don't reduce price, but you increase the person's income, that one too means that he can now afford more quantities, and that one too will increase the level of welfare. So the consumer can say that, no, don't reduce price, rather give me an additional amount of money so that the effect will be the same as reducing the price level. Okay, so that is equivalent variation. Then for compensating variation to now, just assuming there's an increase in price. If there's an increase in price, we've seen that there's going to be a reduction in the consumer's welfare. So if we don't want the consumer's welfare to reduce as a result of an increase in price, we need to give the consumer an amount of money so that he can come back to the initial welfare level, the level of satisfaction. Okay, so the compensating variation is just measuring the amount of money that you have to give to the consumer whenever there's an increase in price, so that the consumer's level of utility will remain unchanged. Okay, if you increase price, there's a reduction in welfare, but we don't want the person's welfare to reduce after the increase in price. So even if they increase price, we'll give the consumer an extra amount of money so that he can still buy the quantity that he used to buy. Assuming there's a fall in price, when price falls too, there's going to be an increase in the consumer's welfare. We don't want the person's welfare to increase. So when price falls, we'll reduce his income so that he'll go back to the old level of utility. Okay, so that is compensating variation. Give the consumer some amount of money when there's an increase in price so that the utility level won't change, or take some amount of money away from the consumer's income whenever there's a fall in price so that the consumer's welfare wouldn't change. Okay, I hope we understand. Any question? Now, I think if you check the trend, this is how the IA questions are. They short stuffs. At times 10 questions, 12 questions, 15, 8. Then you are just supposed to give short answers. So I think we have to be practicing more on these things. All right. Okay, without any question, I think we move on to question 9.
Prove that the slope of the indifference curve, into bracket the marginal rate of substitution, is the ratio of marginal utilities of any two goods under consideration.
Okay, so we want to show that dy dx is equal to marginal utility of x over the marginal utility of good y. So here we are using x1 and 2 as the two goods in question. So the person's utility function is a function of these two goods. So if you want to prove this, you take total differentiation. Okay, take total differentiation of the utility function. So this part becomes du, then you differentiate u with respect to the first group. So we have du the x1 times the x1. Then with respect to x2, so du the x2 times the x2. Now we are talking about an indifference curve. Okay, so for an indifference curve, there's no change in utility. So du is supposed to be 0. Change in utility is 0. Okay, so change in utility is 0. That's why we have the 0 here. Then du the x1 2 is the marginal utility of good 1. If you differentiate the utility function with respect to the good, you get its marginal utility. So mu2, that's the marginal utility of good 2. Yes, Junior.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, yes.
I think taking the total differential of the utility function, don't you think that you finding the marginal utility of the first commodity is supposed to be the partial derivative of the utility function with respect to the first commodity instead of uh, the normal d, like it's supposed to be the Kelly du over Kelly dx1 times the total dx1.
Are you talking about the d that we use this d when we are talking about total differentiation, but what it measures
Yeah,
doesn't change. If we
you,
use
you see, mhm,
we use this one when we are talking about partial. Okay, so
mhm.
if you have dy dx, okay, then it's even possible that y depends not only on x, but we are just holding all the other factors constant. But if we use this d y dx, it means that we are taking total differentiation of all the variables in the function. But still, this one measures a change in y resulting from a change in x. This one too still measures a change in y resulting from a change in x. So when you are using total, we don't use this. We don't use this. It's D that we use. We don't use the delta.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so from here, we just send this one to the left hand side, okay? Whichever one that you send. One side is going to be negative, okay? Now, what we are looking for is change in the second good resulting from a change in the first good, okay? So we divide through by mu2, okay? And then we divide through by dx1, okay? So we have mu1 over mu2 equals negative. Then this is the change in the first good, the second good resulting from the change in the first good. The sign is negative because of the nature of the indifference curve. Okay, so we've been able to prove that these are the ratio of the marginal utilities. Okay, and then this one is the gradient of the indifference curve. So this is just what you have to do. At times, this is just like 2 marks. So you see, you don't need to do much. Just this simple computation and then you are done. All right. Any other question? Okay. Right. Lizzie.
Question 10. Use indifference curve analysis to show whether Baba is in equilibrium and what should be done to arrive at equilibrium if necessary. Baba is currently consuming where the marginal utility associated with consuming bread is twice as large into brackets in absolute value as the marginal utility associated with consuming good X, even though the price of bread is only half the price of good X.
Okay. Just as a word of warning, questions like this, at times, if this one is number one, and this question is number two, jump and come and do this one, okay? Do the ones that you don't have to think much before you come and do these ones. You know the accounts department, most of the times, the time that they give you is very limited. And so you push all the critical thinking questions to the bottom so that if you are done with the easy ones and there's still time, then you go and tackle those ones, okay? So this one, we have to pick out the information that the question is giving us. The first thing we need to know is that the thing is talking about consumer equilibrium or disequilibrium. So you need to know what consumer equilibrium is. And as you know, the consumer is in equilibrium when the ratio of the marginal utilities is the same as the ratio of the prices, okay? So here, the person is consuming bread. We use beef for bread and then another good, X, okay? Now, they are saying that the marginal utility of bread is twice the marginal utility of good X, which means that the marginal utility that the consumer is deriving from consuming bread is higher than that of good X, okay? So if you find the ratio of the marginal utility, then marginal utility B over marginal utility X will be greater than 1, okay? It will be greater than 1 because the marginal utility of bread is higher than that of good X. So if the marginal utility of X is 1, then the marginal utility of bread is going to be 2. So 2 over 1 should be greater than 1. Then when you go to the ratio of the prices to now, they are saying that the price of bread is just half the price of good X. So if the price of good X is 2, then the price of bread is going to be 1, which means that we'll be getting something which is less than 1. So the ratio of the two prices will be less than 1. But the ratio of the marginal utilities to is greater than 1, which means that the ratio of the marginal utility is greater than the ratio of the price. So the consumer is in a disequilibrium. So this is the first thing that you have to know even before we continue. Please, are we together? Are you with me?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes,
So
please.
now we move to the diagram. Okay, I'm sure you've seen this diagram before. This is our budget line. Okay, this is good X, this is bread. There's a point of tangency, point E, where the ratios are the same. But from the data that we have, the ratio of the marginal utility is greater than that of the prices. So it means that this is where we are. Okay, marginal utility of B is higher than marginal utility of X. It means that the person is consuming too much of good X and too less of bread. If you consume too much of a good, your marginal utility becomes very small. That is why the marginal utility of good X is smaller than that of bread. So the disequilibrium is not here, it is here. Because if you accidentally or per pressure, you say that this is where the disequilibrium is, you get the second part of the question wrong. It says that if the person is in a disequilibrium, what should the consumer do before she gets back to equilibrium? So please, let's get those things right. If the marginal utility of the good on the horizontal axis is greater than that on the vertical, then it means that this is where the person is, this is the bundle that the person is consuming. So now this is where the consumer is. We've seen that there's a disequilibrium. What should the person do to restore equilibrium? You need to what? Move down to point E. And by moving down to point E, it means that you'll be consuming more of bread and less of good X. By consuming more of bread, the marginal utility of bread will fall. And by consuming less of good X, the marginal utility of good X will increase, which will later restore the equilibrium. So the first thing you are supposed to say is the consumer is in a disequilibrium. Then the second thing, what the consumer has to do to restore equilibrium. Consume more of bread, and by doing so, your marginal utility of bread falls. You consume less of good X, and by doing so, the marginal utility of X increases, so that you get back to point E again. You come and consume X star and then B star. So equilibrium is restored. Any question?
Hello,
Yes.
good evening.
Good evening.
Please, can you explain when the marginal utility, I mean, when it's below?
Like at this point.
Yes, at that point, yes.
Okay. Just assuming that the person is consuming this bundle, okay? Now, you see that he's consuming too much of bread. And if you consume too much of a good, the marginal utility is very low. Okay, so this is the marginal utility of bread. And then you are consuming so little of good X. So the marginal utility of good X will be what? Will be very high, which means that MUB over MUS will be less than the ratio of the prices. Just assuming that PB over PX is 1. Okay, just assuming that this is equal to 1. Now, because you are consuming too much of bread, the marginal utility here will be less than the marginal utility of good X, which means that this part will be less than 1. The ratio of the marginal utilities will be less than 1. So this ratio will be less than the price ratio. Okay. So if you want to restore equilibrium, you consume less of bread. As you are consuming less of bread, then the marginal utility of B will be what? Increasing. And as you are consuming less of bread, you are consuming more of good X. So the marginal utility of good X will fall up to the point where this ratio will give you 1. Then it will be the same as the ratio of the prices. Then you restore equilibrium. Is that okay?
Yes, please, thank you.
Any other question? All right, Lizzie.
Question 11. If there's a 5% increase in consumer income and the income elasticity of yogurt is 2.5, then what would be the specific percentage change in the quantity of yogurt sold?
All right, so this is just a formula work. Income elasticity is percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in income. The question has given us the percentage change in income as what? 5%. And the income elasticity as 2.5. So we are looking for percentage change in Q. So just make percentage change in Q the subject. You have an income elasticity times percentage change in Y. So 2.5 times 5%. That should give us, I hope it's 12.5. Something like that. So the percentage change in quantity demanded will be 12.5%. I hope we all understand. Right, number 12.
Use the ordinalist utility maximization perspective to derive the angel curve of a good that is both normal and inferior.
Right, so if we remember, the income consumption curve is what we call the angel's curve. And it talks about the changes in the two goods that the consumer is buying whenever there's a change in income, holding the prices of the two goods constant. So as you are increasing income, what is the effect on the demand for the two goods? Let's start from this this budget line, okay, and then this indifference curve. So this was the initial equilibrium point E1, okay, E1. Now there's an increase in income, holding prices constant. We know that the budget line will shift to the right. So this is what we have. It will come to L2. Now this will be our new indifference curve, okay. So what this means is that because of the increase in income, you see that the person is now buying more. If you look at this, this was the initial quantity demanded, just assuming 4, okay. This was the income level. Now income has increased to Y2, so now the person is buying more. The person is buying 6, okay. It means that there's a positive relationship between income and then demand, and that means that this good is a normal good. When income increases and your demand increases, it means you are dealing with a normal good, okay. So this is the point where the good here is a normal good. Now, with a further increase in income, this will be the new budget line with a higher indifference curve. But if you look at what is happening here, now income has increased again, but you realize that the demand has decreased, okay. This is the new equilibrium point, and say the person is buying 4. The person was buying 6. Now with an increase in income, the person is buying 4. It means there's an inferior good. As income has increased, there's a fall in the demand for this good, and it makes this good an inferior good, okay. The meeting will go off. We have to connect again and finish what we have to do. Now, this is possible just assuming that initially the consumer was poor, okay. Maybe he was buying some junk food. He didn't really have much money, and his income increased by just a small proportion. Now he could buy more junk food, okay, which is making the junk food a normal good. But with a further increase in income, now he feels like he has a lot of money, so he doesn't have to buy junk food. So he reduces the quantity of junk food that he buys. So when he was poor, he saw the junk food to be a normal good. But as he's getting richer, he's seeing the junk food as an inferior